The league should absolutely be concerned, Sel. I got some chips here to make a very simple explanation and display as to why the league should be concerned with their issue at hand. So there are 70% players of color in the National Football League, and 30% are white. So the chips I have here designate the 70 players of color. Those are the gray chips, and the 30% white. These would be the red chips. Now, what we're going to do is pour the chips into a bowl. We're going to pour the chips into this bowl, and we're going to mix this up. Why are we doing that? Because, Sel, there are 6 coaches in the NFL that used to play in the NFL. 6 coaches in the NFL that used to play in the NFL. Now, remember, 70% players of color, 30% white. 6 coaches in the NFL that used to play in the NFL. 5 of those coaches are white. What that means is I would have to draw, simply put, I would have to draw 2 gray chips before drawing a red chip to show you how wildly statistically improbable it is that 5 of the 6 coaches that played in the NFL are white when 70% of the players in the NFL are black. So I'm like, you know what? Let's just see the likelihood of this actually happening and this actually occurring. Again, as long as I draw 2 gray chips, then what the NFL is doing is statistically improbable. So we draw a chip without looking here. They kind of stuck together. Gray chip. Okay. Put it back to make sure we keep the 70 to 30 yards.
He got fired already?
I hate you so much.
Oh.
Put it back. Let's see. Great chip. With that being said, what the NFL has done is statistically impossible at best and statistically improbable at worst. Very simply, breaking down again what we just witnessed is if 70% of the players are black and 30% of the players are white, but of the coaches that used to play in the NFL, 83% are white. That's 5 out of 6. 83% are white. There is clearly a disconnect between what has occurred with 70% of the players being black. However, only 17% of the coaches that used to play are black. Somebody has to make that make sense because statistically, it makes no sense. So my problem, Sel, is there's clearly a rift. What is the rift? There is clearly some sort of unequal, inequitable. There's some sort of disconnect between the players being predominantly people of color and the coaches not being people of color and not being black. I wanted to first break down that just statistical improbability, and then we can dive into the why. But I can't wait to hear what you have to say, big dog.
Ooh, my goodness. On the surface, should the league be concerned? I would ultimately say no. However, in getting to that conclusion, you need to be concerned if you're NFL, if your participants, if your coaches, if your fans are concerned. And it seems like it's grown to a place of conversation where the first thing that happens when a black coach is fired is a national conversation. So therefore, that forces the NFL to be concerned. Let's talk about why they shouldn't be concerned in the first place. We got to talk about this process and be truthful about it. Demonstrations aside, which was something that really brought it home in terms of the portrayal when you could see it with that demonstration. Most coaches are hired to bad situations. Good coach, bad situation, right? Sir. The only common denominator in all these situations typically is a bad situation. Yes, why? Because that's the only reason it's available in the first place, right? There's something going wrong typically in these situations. So, since good coaches and great coaches, no matter if you're black or white, go to bad situations, typically you fail, right? Let's just be real about that. That's how the vicious cycle continues. Now, what you're showing and illustrating, what I want people to understand is, what are we drawing from in terms of our pool of applicants? Is our pool of applicants based on former players? Is our pool of applicants based on guys who just love the game and just started their coaching process early? Is our pool of applicants just the U.S. population at large? Because when you hear an argument, well, hey, man, 13% of this country is black, but 59% of the league is black, 70% of color, but then there's only one black head coach today. What's up with that? And then there's a counter argument, too, when you can hear that 80% of this country is white and only 25% of its players are white. But then there are 70% of the coaches, if not more, that are white. So as you can see, none of this logic is linear. None of this logic is congruent, right? It's inconsistencies all around. I just wanted to point that out to highlight before I start diving a little bit deeper. There's a responsibility that comes with power. A long time ago, my dad used to always say, the grown own. Now, we understand that we don't have ownership as a black player. Former black players, we're broadcasters. We don't have ownership. No black majority owner in the NFL, correct? But the grown own. So what comes with that ownership is a responsibility. And that responsibility has two sides of the coin. The responsibility that chooses properly and responsibly chooses who their coaches are of their franchises. And there's also a responsibility on the flip side if you don't own to be chosen. There's a responsibility, as Kobe Bryant once said, to be undeniable. Kobe Bryant talked about his first 2 years in the league. He said, I didn't even get off the bench. You know, I was coming back and forth. I wasn't a starter. I wasn't Kobe Bryant. He said, but I became undeniable. You had to put me in there. I want both sides to understand there's a responsibility with ownership to choose properly and responsibly, but also to be undeniable if you're trying to be chosen. All that said, man, let's talk about this. Because there's some data out there that supports, like, I don't know what to do with this. This is such a complex question that we're trying to come up with simple answers. Do you know that the data shows that minority head coaches have been given second opportunities at a higher rate than white coaches? Make that make sense. I'll just pause right now. Y'all keep, everybody saying, oh, no black coaches. Okay, but they give black coaches another chance at it than they do more so than white coaches. Ask Tony Dungy. Multiple jobs. Dennis Green, Lovie Smith, Jim Caldwell, Herm Edwards, Romeo Crennel, Hugh Jackson, Ray Rhodes, Art Shell. Multiple opportunities. Then we start to say, well, they're not just giving us the opportunity in the same breath. Well, there have been 140 coaching opportunities since 2000. 24 have went to black head coaches. People will look at those numbers and say, oh, that's pretty low. Actually, it's 27. 19%. Where do you get to 19%? Where does that fall? Does that fall under the threshold of current players, or does that fall higher than the threshold of black people in America? So all I'm saying is this is a very complicated answer, and it's a very complex question. But to just simply say that there's a growing issue in the NFL when the data doesn't support that is where I pause.
I think it depends on where you look for your data.
Exactly.
Right? And I think it depends on where you look for your data.
Why do we look for our data in former players?
The reason, and you don't have to.
Okay, we started there.
For me, former players is a microcosm of a macro issue.
Okay, let's go.
The reason why I can look for my data in former players is because that is where everything is now isolated. When you talk about the population of our country is 13% black, that also includes women. But there are no women in the NFL, nor are there women that are NFL head coaches. So
greater to my point.
Instantly, the data of the entire population of the world or America is diluting the data of the NFL. Mm-hmm. So if we talk about data that is concentrated, non-dilute at all, and we simply look at players in the National Football League, coaches in the National Football League. The players in the National Football League, 70% people of color. But the coaches that used to play in the National Football League are 17% people of color. That is now we're looking at specifically concentrated data. But for me, the larger issue is diversity breeds excellence. That is why the NFL should care. Not because, we got to get more black people need jobs. No, because the NFL is undermining its own product by not having a diverse coaching staff and coaching pool. What do I mean? 2003, the NFL, it initiated the Rooney Rule. You had to interview a person of color if there was a head coaching vacancy. By 2004, Lovie Smith was hired to coach the Chicago Bears. Mm-hmm. By 2007, for the first time in NFL history, in 42 years, there was a Super Bowl with 2 black head coaches. Statistically, there was less than a 4% chance that would happen. What does that mean? That the game was elevated by the initiation of diversity based upon the Rooney Rule. If teams cannot look out for themselves and do what's in the best interest of the team and thus in the best interest of the game, then the NFL should look out for teams. And we do this in all of football. In college football, if there is a targeting penalty, a defensive player will be thrown out for the rest of that game. Why? Because they are looking out for the best interest of the defensive player. If the defensive player lowers his head, you are being punished not because of what you did to the offensive player. You're being punished because you were doing something to the detriment of yourself.
Gotcha.
If the Miami Dolphins are firing a black coach like Brian Flores, you are doing something to the detriment of yourself, because Brian Flores is the best head coach that you, the Miami Dolphins, have had in the last 20 years. And Miami Dolphins, if you are acting in the detriment of the Miami Dolphins, then you are also acting to the detriment of the National Football League, because the better the Dolphins do, the better the product of the National Football League. So in football, we always make sure we put precautions in place to not damage an individual nor damage the individual's product. So why would we not do that for the game of football? You're exactly right when you say it depends on where you look for your data, but some data can be erroneous. And so where I really am looking at my data is within the constitute of the NFL. Let me break it down one more step, and then I'm done with this lap.
Yeah.
In the NBA, you see roughly the same disparity between players. 83% of the NBA players are black, 17% of the NBA players are white. However, of the 12 NBA coaches that used to play in the NBA, 8 are black and 4 are white. So you don't see that same disparity, because in the NBA, 2 out of every 3 coaches that used to play are black. But in the NFL, 1 out of every 6 coaches that used to play are black. So there's a disparity in the NFL that does not exist within the NBA. So we can still adhere to your worldly statistics of the lack of black people in the country. But in the NBA, there's clearly more promotion of diversity as it pertains to coaching than there is in the NFL. So that still leads me to some sort of problem that I'm trying to figure out why it exists.
Well, look, we ain't gonna have enough time for me to answer why it exists. I'm just gonna give you my 2 cents, and hopefully it adds up to $1, damn it. Let's talk here. Is diversity unilateral? Is diversity two-way street? Or is diversity just one way? Because if you say, okay, we're the black head coaches, then somebody gonna say, we're the white players. And this is the most gangster conversation you could ever have. Because it only goes 2 ways when you answer that question. And no one wants to have that ultimate conversation as a national conversation. Because if you say we're the black head coaches and someone says, well, we're the white players, this is what you can get. Here's the softball answer. Well, without bias, that's just the way it is. Now, you wanna hear the group text answer? Maybe they ain't good enough. Now, that's a conversation that I've heard go one way, but I ain't heard it go the other way. In terms of why did we hit here in terms of reality? Look at the black coaches and look at the white coaches. They get fired, brother, no matter who you are, because you're going to bad situations. Let's talk about that. I have a placard in my home, in my studio, that reads, "Life is a game. Football is serious." I changed the word football to let people know that life is a game, but marriage is serious. Life is a game, but parenting is serious. Life is a game, but broadcasting is serious. What you're doing is serious, but you got to always keep perspective of this is a game to be played. And there's a game within the game that you must also play. Why do I bring that up to start this second lap? Is because if you're playing the game, you got to understand 2 things. It will create winners and it will create losers.
Yes, sir.
And rarely, if ever, you're going to see a tie. So when we say equality, when we say diversity, it seems like we're always trying to imply a tie. Like, keep it uniform, keep it balanced. But where is it balanced anywhere in this world, including in minority coaching hiring, including on the field with the actual players as participants? There is no equality. That needs to be dispelled. That said, let's talk about where we are right now, because when the Rooney Rule was instituted, we're in the same place as we were as when it was instituted. Today as yesterday. And to me, there's a parallel, loose parallel, between the black quarterback and the black head coach. Let's talk about the black quarterback. Remember, there was a day, where are the black quarterbacks at? Where are the black quarterbacks at? Well, they got a late start, and we all know our country's history, et cetera, and the biases. But the black quarterback all of a sudden became now, if you look at quarterbacks, we have 15 quarterbacks make multiple starts last year, and that's not even including Deshaun Watson, of 32 teams. So think about it. When you talk about it now versus then, 2000, we had the same about a number, basically. 12 quarterbacks, now we're at 15. But that conversation, you want to go before then, 1, 2. To the tune of now, we saw a black quarterback not only get $100 million, but get 2 $100 million contracts, the first one. All I'm trying to say is the conversation about the black quarterback evolved. The conversation about the black head coach will evolve as well. However, a late starting point has to be factored in.
So I love some of the points you're bringing up because we hear them a lot in life. We hear them a lot on social media. Let me first address the black quarterback, especially as it pertains to the coaches, something that was illuminated to me. I think what so many people try to do is confuse excellence with equality. And we can never make that mistake of confusing excellence with equality. One black head coach currently in the National Football League, that one black head coach is Mike Tomlin. Mike Tomlin is utterly and unquestionably excellent. Mike Tomlin is the only head coach in the history of the NFL to start his career with 15 consecutive non-losing seasons. This includes the great coaches like Bill Belichick. Mike Tomlin is the only one to start his career with 15 consecutive non-losing seasons. Mike Tomlin is excellent. So we can't use the likes of Mike Tomlin, who's excellent, to try to point to some sort of beacon or landmark of equality. Because what so many people try to do is say that, well, look at Deshaun Watson, look at Patrick Mahomes, look at 2B Lamar Jackson, Dak Prescott. And we start to confuse these quarterbacks, one of which was a unanimous MVP, Lamar Jackson, excellent. The other of which, Patrick Mahomes, the greatest quarterback ever through the age of 25, already a first ballot Hall of Famer, excellent. And we try to look at these quarterbacks that are excellent and try to use them to act as though excellent also equals equality, and that's just not the case. So when I look at the excellence versus equality point, I have to bring that up. The second point, and again, I'm going to try to do this on the fly. You brought me to a place that I hadn't yet prepared for. There is that very uncomfortable conversation of, well, there aren't a lot of black head coaches, but there aren't a lot of black players. White players. So let me preface to make this clean. There aren't a lot
way to give equality. They're all the same to you.
There aren't a lot of black coaches, but there aren't a lot of white players. So there aren't a lot of white running backs, Acho. Aren't a lot of white cornerbacks. We hear that argument so often. So what would you say is the predominant characteristic a head coach needs? Is it a mental attribute, a physical attribute?
Mental attribute.
At least probably 90 mental if you're a coach, maybe 10% physical. I don't really know necessarily what a coach would need physical attributes for. Players. Physical attribute, mental attribute. Physical. Players, dominant attributes necessary of the physical. If you're just talking about what coaches versus players need, and I read this book called Sports Gene, written by David Epstein, an investigative reporter. It talks about how, on average, the white NBA player is 6'9", and the black NBA player is 6'7". However, on average, the black NBA player can touch higher than the white NBA player based upon his limb length. So maybe it's not that white men can't jump, it's that white men can't reach. It talked about how that there's a proportionate difference between, on average, what black people physically, their traits, and white people's physical traits. For example, slow twitch muscle fibers versus fast twitch muscle fibers. You know all too well about that with your track background. Slow twitch muscle fibers, they don't fatigue as quickly, but they can go for greater lengths. Fast twitch muscle fibers fatigue more quickly, but they can go at faster lengths. That is why you see great sprinters like Usain Bolt maybe will fatigue sooner because he has a higher number of fast twitch muscle fibers based upon a genetic predisposition. It also talks about how if you're just looking at a model and you remove race from the model, how the center of gravity for a black individual is 3% higher than the center of gravity for a white individual. There's a 3% difference there. Just talking about in a model, that 3% center of gravity difference helps a person move swifter through water than it does on land. So when you look at a Michael Phelps who moves swifter through water, then you look at a Michael Jordan who moves swifter on land. So for those that want to instantly throw back, well, there aren't a lot of white cornerbacks and there aren't a lot of white running backs and there aren't a lot of white this and that, understand the difference. Why do you see more white offensive linemen and you see more black wide receivers? You have to look into slow twitch muscle fibers versus fast twitch muscle fibers. You have to look in genetic predispositions. But when talking about coaches, we're not talking about genetic predispositions unless we're talking about intelligence.
Well, it's not just intelligence, it's mental attributes. Now you're getting into the deep, choppy waters where I live. Where I survive. Man.
It's dangerous, big dog.
No, it ain't if you're sophisticated. No, it's not. Look, I grew up in danger. I survived snowfall, the real snowfall. How the hell you gonna tell me about danger? Here's the thing. and I got some backlash about this, but I stand strong in what my beliefs are. We all day long want to talk about how someone's physical attributes are, whether you're fat, whether you're out of shape, whether you're slow. We want to talk about physical attributes all day in generalizations, right? And I hate to generalize. I say in general, don't generalize. That's what I always tell people. But we like to do that all day. Physically, you could do that all day. Talk about how someone look, et cetera, right? And you can even sum that up and say you're physically weak. Let's talk about that in the same respect. Mentally. Gets quiet. People don't want to talk. You can talk about mental attributes the same way you can talk about physical attributes. Do you go to the mental gym? Do you read? Do you meditate? Do you take care of yourself? You listening to the right things? You tuning into the right things? You can sum someone up as mentally weak. How dare you call them that? But you can call them that physically. Why do I bring that up? Because it highlights what you just said. We're talking about what is a coach. And it's so vague and it's so dangerous to go there that most people don't. So then all of a sudden you don't do the truest of knowledge and experience in terms of knowing who you're hiring. Let me give it to you like this. Since you play it, don't mean you could coach it. You started off with an applicant of people who played. Since you play it, don't mean you could coach it. You know what playing means? That I know how to get it done. Yep. You know what coaching means? I know how to make you get it done.
Yes, sir.
It's a big difference. And that doesn't go by racial lines. But since we don't have that conversation, we got to generalize. The greatest coaches ever never played pro football. So let's not use like there's some kind of congruency, there's some kind of relationship between playing and actually being Bill Belichick. Played in college, played in high school. He didn't play at the pro level. I say all of that to say this. The reward systems, the incentives that shape behavior, the reward systems are different in the same sport for different participants. Let's go to college. If you're a college coach, Nick Saban, Kirby Smart, you get rewarded differently than if you're a pro coach. Think about it. When Bill Belichick wins a Super Bowl, they give him the worst pick of the draft. When Kirby Smart and Nick Saban win a championship, you know what they get? The best 5 stars available. Reward system, same sport, different, even though they're on different levels. You know what the NFL is different than the college coaching? The NFL will go to you and say, hey, I know you've never coached before at this level. I know you've never done this job before, but hey, here's the worst situation because that's the only reason that it's available. And you've never done it before. Now go out there and get it done. Black or white, the failure rate is high to the tune of every single year. In the last 5 seasons, we've had 7 coaches fired. That's the average every year. I hate that we have to draw this by racial lines. Because if we're going to draw by racial lines, all I'm saying is keep the pen out. Let's keep drawing. Because then you look on the field, that's not equality. You look on the sidelines, that's not equality. You look upstairs, that's not equality. So where do we ever draw from equality to now make this an equality conversation?
Great. At the point in which you look around and you say, that's not equality, that's not equality, that's not equality, shouldn't you also look around and say, let me try to fight for equality, let me try to fight for equality, let me try to fight for equality?
It's never going to happen.
Sure, but just because it's not going to happen doesn't mean you shouldn't try to make it happen as close as possible.
Well, I think it's not even a desirable outcome because don't you want to win? Well, guess what? Every time you Acho is up, somebody down. And you don't want to talk about that down like you don't want to talk about mental attributes. We don't want to talk about the consequences of our success. But it comes at a price.
Correct. But in this price, the people or the grouping that is down are persons of color and the grouping that is up are white people or non-people of color.
Wait a minute, though.
We're talking about a racial disparity in coaching.
No, you're right. I'm just telling you, let's go back to our days. Would you rather been a coach or a player?
Player? I don't know.
Player, yeah. Ain't no thoughts. Player. Coaching is a secondary. That's when you know, I ain't making it this 40 time a little slow. I don't have the reach, et cetera. Most of the league is what?
Black.
Yeah. So the primary goal, the primary entity, the primary attribute of this great NFL that has taken over multiple days of the week, that took the Sunday from the church, that is the biggest sport in our country. And the number one thing that they're promoting is the player. And the number one thing that everyone strives to be is that player. And the number one thing that we have actually attained as people of color is being those players. But then we want to take it to the next level, which is secondary, being a coach. And now I want to say, where's the equality? Don't you know that there's a counter argument to that as well?
But it's not secondary at this junction in time. Now we've realized more with illumination that, in all honesty, first off, being a coach is just better than being a player. Your salary is guaranteed. You don't have to get hit. You ain't got to do nothing. But more importantly, being an owner. which is the next conversation.
Hello.
And that got to be
the grown own. So all we know is there needs to be more Christian McCaffreys and more Mike Tomlins.